afternoon. We are hosting a very special keynote speaker today, Charles Landry. Mr. Landry is the founder of Comedia and a fellow at Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin. He invited the concept of creative city in the late 80s, and its focus is how cities can create the conditions for people and organizations to think, to plan, and to act with imagination to solve urban problems and develop opportunities. This means that a city with its residents and organizations needs to embed a culture of creativity. The concept has become a global movement, and I actually personally had a chance to listen to him 2 or 3 years back from now in Norway, where he gave his excellent speech on the creative city. But today we are here to listen to him, his concept of creative bureaucracy. The creative bureaucracy acknowledges that people are at the heart of the system. It claims that it is not only a structure, but it is a group of people with lives, with emotions, with energy, passion, and values. You know that creativity, resilience, and sustainability are among one of the 3 of the 6 main axes of Marmara Urban Forum this year. So this is exactly what we need for creative, resilient, and sustainable cities. So I'm very curious to hear Mr. Landry's thoughts on that. So I just stopped my introduction here to hear more on this fascinating concept and give the floor to Mr. Landry. Please take the floor.
Well, it's great to be here with you, and I wish I was, I don't know what, just saying hello, hugging you, and doing all sorts of things. So I want to talk about the creative bureaucracy, why, what, how. And because cities are ecosystems, you can have interesting people, interesting artists, and interesting business people, but also the administration is a crucial part of all of this. And our image is that the public administration, the bureaucracy, is something that you cannot penetrate, but I think one can. And really the basic idea is let's think afresh about all of that. Let's think afresh about the public administration. Let's unleash the talent and try and attract new talented people to come into these systems, which we know are often very rigid and need to change. Now, clearly, the creative bureaucracy is not everything, but without a bureaucracy, nothing much can work. Now, the main desire, or one of them, is that we think that there might be a leader who says, oh, let's do this, and then it all stops in the frozen middle, levels 3, 4, 5. But we think, and I think, potentially that middle, if it is given the power, is and can be an innovative middle. And in these public administrations, as you well know across the world, there are many unsung heroes that we want to celebrate through this idea. Now, if we're looking at the future, and all of us are looking at the future, given the pandemic, and we were looking at that before, we know there's been incredible changes of various sorts. And what one really needs to do is wake up. And this waking up, all of us need to wake up in one way or another. And a friend of mine, he is a public artist. Every 2 weeks, he puts a word down near my city. And instead of saying lockdown, he said luck down. Now that looks a bit dark. So I prefer to look at things from a brighter scene and look at it in a more, I don't know, positive way, whether we can make an opportunity out of the crisis. So as we all know, the world has become a smaller place. The nomadic world enables us to connect like we are connecting at this very moment. And there are probably many countries listening to your wonderful MARUF event. But the big issue, and there are many, many, many big issues, is that the hubris that we had has been humbled. This crisis has allowed us to have some deep rethinking. And one of the things we recognize is now that our civilization is a thin film of order we build around the chaos of events. And what that also reminds us, that many people thought that we want to go back to the old normal. It's an exotic destination where we want to go. But the older urgencies like climate collapse and all of these things, of course, still exist. And this is why all over the world, people are trying to reimagine. How can we blend nature into the city? How can we have a better relationship with nature and obviously make our quality of life therefore better? And what I think many of us have realized is that we've got a real angst, anxiety, this is an exhibition in Berlin, about having some sort of vision of our future. And this is really what we've got to imagine. We've got to imagine a planet B which has the good qualities, even though we need to change and make planet A, where we exist, better. But what it all reminds us of is that we're in a very fragile world. And in this fragility, we really need to think clearly. And for many of us, we think that it's really 1 minute before midnight, and therefore we need to act quite urgently. And as we know, and here is the cover of my latest book, The Civic City in the Nomadic World, we need to, this breaking line in the middle, we need to heal. Because we're in the midst of a systemic crisis, and business as usual will not get us where we need to be. Our economic order and way of life is materially expansive, socially divisive, and environmentally hostile. So in summary, what I'm saying is any creative entity, and it could be the city as a whole, an area of the city or whatever, creates the conditions for imaginative solutions to problems and opportunities. So what would this plan B look like? And there are many aspects of the plan B. But there is an exhibition that takes place, an event takes place in a year, over a week in Amsterdam, called We Make the City. And you can see these words, making the city better for all of us. Let the city have a circular economy. Let everybody be empowered. Make it climate proof. Make it inclusive. And all of the things that you've been discussing over the last period, all of these are the big issues of our time. Now, typically we think, if I say creative, you think creative artists, creative scientists, perhaps business people, social innovators. Many think the only creative person is a hipster. But rarely do we think that a public administrator could be imaginative. But they're dealing with all the big issues of our time: mobility, welfare, diversity, children, parks, everything that you can imagine. And these are massive challenges for them and everybody. Now, when you think of how we have looked at the public administration through time, we know Max Weber, hierarchies, new public management, where we thought the business sector will tell us how everything should work. Then we had new public governance, which suggested we should bring in all stakeholders. And increasingly, people talk about new public service, where together with citizens, the public administration and the government tries to solve problems. And finally, people talk about open governance, where data and everything is available and transparent. So these are the trajectories that we're living through and coming through in our lives. But there's one massive breakthrough that we all know about, and that is the digital turn, and with its data and all of that which we cannot hide from. Most of it is very good, but there are also dangers that I don't need to tell you about, being controlled by, unknown forces, and so on. But the challenge is to create systems and administrative systems that are able to work with the new technology in ways that it is a good handshake. Now, the critique of bureaucracies, we know, and many are very negative, of course, is that they're too much like spaghetti, or in English we say red tape. It's confusing. You can't get anything done. It takes too long and nobody answers. And also we think that everything is in a silo. Nobody thinks collectively. The economic people and the social people and the cultural people rarely are working together. And this, of course, is a challenge that increasingly must be faced. The other thing is that people think that we write too many papers and we don't act. These are some of the documents from Paris, all related to their climate initiatives. So perhaps whatever is written should be simple and clear. Now, this led for me, and I'll talk about that in a minute, to something called the Creative Bureaucracy Festival. We just had our fourth event. 18,000 visitors were there. I think 51% were under 34-year-old of the visitors, and over 50% were women. So I think there's something very interesting going on. Now, a central dilemma, as you know, is a decline of the common good, the rise of complex, wicked problems, a recognition that the market on its own cannot solve things, and that the solution is a collective endeavor. Now, there have been over the years, and I don't want to go into all of this, many initiatives, the Digital City in 1993, MindLab, Vinova, Citra, government innovation agencies, Nesta in Britain, Forum Virium in Finland, Apolitical, the Civic Imagination Office in Bologna. Anyway, all of this is showing me that there's something happening, as there is with things like living labs and so on. So the desire of this idea is to say, you are not alone. We are not alone. There are many of us. We can build a better bureaucracy. We can build a new organizational type that actually works well for all of us. And we know that public administrations always recruit or often recruit bright people, but they are taught to conform, whereas in their private lives, they live a more agile world and so on. Now, these two words, creative and bureaucracy, seem to be in tension, but the aim is to capture the positive values that were historically part of the public administration. A long time ago, it was seen as benign and modern. Now, what we know is what shifts systems. What shifts system is a crisis like the pandemic, or big, strong concepts like resilience and sustainability that are gathering calls, or a mission when you can actually get someone in a city to agree on where collectively it wants to go forward. And sometimes there's a mood for change when suddenly people say, yes, 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 we need walkable cities. We need things like that. But also what shifts a system is a strong set of ethical principles. So, for example, I'll give you an idea that the Council of Europe took up from us, called the intercultural city, and changed the way some cities dealt with the problems and issues and potentials of diversity. Another example I mentioned already was the whole notion of resilience, or the very, very popular Carlos Moreno and Mayor Hidalgo from Paris idea of the 15-minute city, which is a city where everything is close and has an eco twist to it. Now, the Office of Public Sector Innovation in the OECD has looked at all of this as well very often and has said there are different types of ways of innovation. You can enhance what you've already got. You can have a mission, as I said. You can adapt your current rules and so on. And you can anticipate the future and think what that future rule might be. This is all quite good and helps explain things. Now, one of the core characteristics we have to think about, what is this future bureaucrat? The main thing is really obviously openness and mindset that is open, but then knows when to close in and is convergent. that has an ability to look ahead, is focused, can integrate different forms of knowledge from different departments, is emotionally intelligent, and has both technical skills, but also these generic skills, for example, the skill of communicating. And most importantly, it is collaborative. Now, as we know, there are many good people who join public administrations. They have good values, good intentions. They're competent. They've decided to work in the public domain. And of course, there are many people who just want to have a job and don't care about this. But somehow, when these good people are in structures, something happens to them. Their good ideas somehow fade in the system for many, many reasons. And that is the dilemma. And that's why so many people are frustrated. And this is a German thing, which is just garbage people. But if you understand German, you'll see that even garbage people are multi-talented if you give them the opportunity to find solutions to what they're doing. Now, the three aims of the creative bureaucracy are quite simple: to revalue the public interest as a vocation, to help shift the image of what a bureaucracy could be, and attract young people who are talented, tech savvy, and so on, to help reshape that bureaucracy. But you have to empower those people. And the three pillars are to rethink the regulations in the incentives for now, to reshape the inner life of the bureaucracy so people can give of their best, and to create new links with the civic and business and other worlds. And the three goals we have are obviously to address the big issues that really matter, to turn these urgent policies into reality, like decarbonizing or creating a circular economy, and obviously to create fairer and more livable places. And if there was one sentence that encapsulates everything, just one sentence, it would be, how can we move from a no because to a yes if culture? Now, the core issues that emerge in all of this is you have to have a project that embodies this new thinking. And then obviously you want to have many of them, so you generate critical mass so that you can scale it up and embed it into the way the system and the organization works. So the question I've always asked myself, is it the structure that needs changing or the culture? And in fact, what I believe, it's needing to change the culture. And so what we're talking about is how you reframe so that the vision shapes the rules, not the rules that exist shape the vision and constrain you. So this Russian piece of art tells me, yes, we need to rethink these rules. I just love this image, and so I'm showing it to you. So that means also thinking, because the law is obviously always involved, is always to look at what was the spirit of the law, what did they want to do, rather than the specific points it says. And this is where this different culture comes in, this more open culture. And if you were to sort of encapsulate it in terms of planning principles, you'd say to move away from this predict and provide model, I need a road at 20 tons of cement or whatever, to another model, which is an elastic planning model, which is strategically principled. It knows where it's going. We know what we want, but we are tactically flexible in trying to get there because we do not know the precise conditions in the future. Now, there are different levels of creativity, as you well know. I won't go into this in detail. You can imitate something, which is very good if it's good and you find it somewhere else. You can modify it and vary it. You can combine different elements. You can learn from culture and economics and combine them because it gives you an insight. And sometimes you can transform something. You see something in a sector, let's say the social sector, and suddenly find it's incredibly useful for your physical planning. And very, very rarely do any of us have a completely new idea. So all of this, I think, requires courage, perhaps even moral courage. It requires being able to be activated and so on. But there is obviously a series of issues. Of course, we need routine and predictability. I'm not saying you have to change things every 5 minutes and just sort of go crazy saying the new, the new, the new. But you have to open yourself out, I believe, to being able to see things afresh. The other big issue we've mentioned is dealing with the silo and trying to get this collective intelligence and collective insights working in any city. And it means, therefore, less multidisciplinary working. The different silos just talk to each other and remain the same, but think of working in a transdisciplinary way. So what are we all bringing? This was another Amsterdam event, and I thought, yes, what are we bringing to all of this? Well, here is an example from Bologna. They have managed and co-managed this whole idea of the urban commons, and they have a declaration 2014 that allows various facilities to be co-managed by citizens and the city itself. Adelaide had a massive project for several years where citizens or bureaucrats could say, I've got a problem and I want it solved. And because it was legitimized by the Premier, they could try and do it in 90 days. And they had a lot of success because they had a deadline to solve problems in 90 days. Another little example is Helsinki's Restaurant Day. You couldn't do anything in Helsinki. It was so complex to do anything. And then some activists just put restaurants in the street. It was disallowed. But the mayor said, isn't our vision to have a vibrant, vital city? This is precisely what we want. And so changed the rules for that. And this movement idea of Restaurant Day has become quite a big thing. Or here, another city nearby, once the green city of Europe, Lahti, was the first that did carbon trading at a city level. If you took your bike, you got various vouchers, you could spend them in a coffee bar and so on. And so that was a lovely circular system of doing good stuff and then actually getting a reward for it. And many of you will know Parking Day, which started in San Francisco, where people decided to take over car parks. The car park attendant said, you can't do that. But the man said, I put 4 hours in, I can have this space for 4 hours. This again is another one of these little movements, which is called tactical urbanism. Of course, there's much more than these ideas, I agree. But when they come together, you then do tend to create a dynamic. And so I feel, from my experience of working with this creative bureaucracy idea over the last period, where not only our big event in Berlin, but there have been events simultaneously in South Africa. There's one in the Czech Republic coming up. There's one in Brussels, etc., etc. It's all this movement of people trying to see themselves as a group of people who are trying to make the world a better place. And in our last physical event, we also had a fuck-up night. This is the man who is the manager of the Berlin airport that took somehow, very un-German, 10 more years than it normally should have taken. And he explained why that was. And I love the honesty of him to just talk about the problems he had. Another thing we do, and I'm sorry to talk so much about our own event, but it may be interesting for you, we validate heroes and heroines. The woman on the left of my screen is Gabriela Gomez Montt, who had one of the best laboratories, living labs in Mexico City, the Laboratorio para la Ciudad, where they created a constitution for the city, for example. They did many other things. The guy in the middle was the director of MindLab, one of the first national innovation agencies for public sector. And the woman on the right is an unknown woman who basically helped Berlin become what it was. She had the keys to the light industrial buildings and gave them to those people she thought were good. And that actually helped develop, in a way, the art world. She didn't let, sex shops go into any of her industrial buildings and facilities. She only allowed what she considered good people to come in. She was later had to resign because she was a bit too radical. But anyway, we gave her a prize. Now, this year, we just had 4 big themes, and you would have your own themes. The first day was about reframing. How can you look at something from a different perspective? So instead of treating knife crime, as Glasgow did, which was the biggest knife crime area in Britain, as a crime and the police dealing with it, they thought of it as a social health problem. And doing that, health people got involved. And over time, knife crime has reduced dramatically in Glasgow. Another example of reframing, of course, is seeing waste as a resource rather than a problem. The other theme for a day was rethinking in a sense how you work. How do you do placemaking? Who is involved? What are the mechanisms? Do you empower people from below? All of those sort of ideas. The third theme of the day was really, is there an opportunity in the crisis? What is permanent and what is transient from the pandemic? And as we know, many things that seemed impossible became possible. And that was actually very revealing. And the fourth day was this mood for change, which I believe is gathering steam. And this mood for change is expressed, for example, in the 15-minute city, where so many people are copying this idea. And the final half day we had, which just said, and I'm saying it to you as well, who is going to change these systems? If it's not you out there, you may be a business person, a social innovator, you may be a public administrator, you may be a local person, a national person, but it's only together that we will do the changes. And we used to give, when we were physical, we used to give scarves to everybody. And this is the daughter of the leader of Eurocities Network, Annalisa Boni, her daughter Nora, who's wearing one of our creative bureaucrat scarves. And so I believe, and I know this might seem all a bit silly, that perhaps if we do some of this, as this graffiti shows, we might be happy again. And so that's the end of my little presentation. And I'll just stop my screen, and here you see me, and I'll say hello to you again for 2 minutes. And there are no questions in the chat. If Burhan wants to talk to me, she please can. If not, I'll just look at you, and we'll just look at each other, which is an incredibly interesting experience for me, because I can see lots of technical stuff, and then I can see a lovely translator for people who are deaf. And I will now then finish. And so I hope to see you somewhere, and I really enjoyed talking to you. So I will now say goodbye and hope to see you somewhere soon, wherever you are. So thank you very much, and goodbye. Bye-bye.